Hello, Chris Henderson. Welcome to Ordinary Visionaries.
Oh, hello. It's been a long time.
It has been a while. So we've worked together. You were in my mastery program a while ago,
Hmm.
and I look at a picture of you every day. See, I have a picture of your group with the mastery program sitting above my printer here, and it's got almost 20 of you, and you're right there uh, at the top. So that's a nice picture, you know. There's sort of an example of the people I've worked with over the years, and I remember working with you well. I remember some of our sessions. I remember some of the struggles we had trying to figure out, well, if you do this and you do that, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll get into all of that. So the first question I ask everyone on Ordinary Visionaries is, how are you an ordinary visionary?
Um, well, I might upset you at this point because I was thinking about this question and I thought, do you know what? I'm not sure I recognise myself in those terms.
Yeah, well, that's not unusual.
And I think I've just done lots of things. And I'm the
Yeah,
sort of person who kind of decides they want to do something, puts their head down, kind of tries to work out how to do it, and then gets it done.
yeah.
If that makes you an ordinary visionary, then I qualify.
Yeah, well, Chris, there's apparently a lot of people on my list who do not consider themselves ordinary visionaries because I put out the call many, many, many times. I mean, I'm getting enough people to interview, but I'm not getting thousands. And that really made me think. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that feel that they really haven't accomplished very much. You know, we all feel we could accomplish more. Hmm.
I mean, I guess it's not that I don't think I've accomplished things. I think I've accomplished lots of things. I was writing the little profile thing,
Yeah.
and I said, "Well, I've done this, and I've done that, and I've done the other." I said, "Some of it even worked." um, so I feel like I have accomplished a lot.
Yeah.
The term visionary, I think, is an interesting one. It sort of implies something slightly mystical, or slightly, seeing beyond horizons that other people can see beyond, or something, or something. I just do stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And, well, I think that's kind of a trait of ordinary visionaries. You know, in interviewing more than almost 30 people so far, certain themes kind of emerge. And, based on your background, your conditioning, where you live, your education, your biology, we, certain things happen in a certain way. We don't have a choice about a lot of the things that happen. But somehow, because of those choices, we took action. We had an idea. I mean, how many bad ideas have you had that nothing really happened, or
Yeah.
it was a clunker, right? And yet you didn't go, "Oh, I'm a terrible, awful failure." Hopefully, well, let's try something else.
Yeah.
So, and
And a lot of the
simple.
things which I started out doing didn't end up being the thing I thought they were going to be. They ended up being something else. Some of them fairly successfully, some of them less successfully, but all of them kind of woven into some sort of rich tapestry of a life.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting looking back. I mean, how old are you now?
58 and a half.
58 and a half. Okay. Well, I've gone a few more times around the sun. I'm 72. And, looking back, it's like, I feel like the same person I've always been. And yet I've had so many adventures,
Mm.
and I've touched a lot of people. So have you. So we're going to get we're not going to philosophically mull over exactly what ordinary visionary is for a while. What I'm interested in is the kind of things you've done, what things were exciting to you, what things were challenging to you, etc. And since I have this book here, you wrote this little book a few years ago called Jump, and that's a pretty massive book. It's also beautifully designed. There's 10 million words in it, And tell me a little bit about this book, because this was sort of a culmination of so many things you've done in your career.
Yeah, sure. So maybe with your permission, I'll kind of lead up to that a little bit, because I think it makes a little bit more sense in a context.
That's fine. Great.
So I started my career working for a couple of big companies in the UK, rose pretty quickly up the ladder, and ended up as a director of, I think in this order, property, transformation, human resources, strategy, operations, and then human resources again.
Wow.
And I kind of worked out in all that time, well, a couple of things. One was I wasn't really, in Jill Conrath's words, I was listening to her interview with you yesterday, and she said, I'm not very good at taking orders, and that really resonated with me.
Yeah.
But also that I did the same job, whatever they put on the job title, which was essentially trying to work out how to make the people who worked with me more successful. How did I help them do what they needed to do? Eventually, big organizations don't like it when they pay you lots of money and you don't do exactly what they tell you. That's not popular. So eventually, they paid me quite a lot of money to kind of go on my way, and I set up my own little consultancy business. And I was going along quite happily, doing everything and lots of different things for lots of different people, very, very broad. I was only 40 at this point in time, still had a big mortgage and all those kind of things. And then I sort of knew I needed to specialize in something. All the people I admired most had a thing. They were known for something. And it was pretty clear to me that was going to be around leadership teams. And sometime around that, I can't remember how it all came about, if I'm honest. I came across this guy in the States who was kind of helping people do marketing for independent consultants.
Never heard of him.
He turned out to be a charlatan, yeah. And I signed up, and we did some work together, really refining what my offer was, what my product was, all those good things. And in the course of that, and I can picture the scene. I can tell you which room of the house I was in. I can tell you it was dark outside. We were having one of our one-to-one conversations, and I came up within that conversation the idea of the 6 game-changing conversations, which are the foundation of that book.
What happened in that conversation we were having? I don't recall that exactly.
No?
But that happens sometimes, doesn't it? It's like, pow, yes, 6 game-changing conversations.
It was, it was kind of in formation. There was some of the ingredients were already present. And then I remember very vividly that conversation and something kind of forming out of I don't know where. And I also don't quite remember where the point was where I decided it'd be a good idea to write a book about all that. But it was definitely during the engagement with you.
Yeah.
And I decided I was going to write the book. I decided I didn't want to do the actual writing, so I recruited myself a ghostwriter. And an incredibly painful 3 years followed. People ask me, are you going to write another one? No, I'm not ever going to write another book. I am done.
And if it is, it ain't going to be like that one. Yeah. So
it ended up taking a lot more time, a lot more effort. It cost me a lot of money. But it transformed it, and the work I did with you transformed my business. So I went from going along quite nicely, thank you. I think it probably doubled or trebled the size of my business for the next few years.
Wow. Well, that's good to hear. So I'm interested in talking about those game-changing conversations, because that's the heart of the meat of your work. That's sure. The difference that you made. And let's go into those, maybe in some depth. I mean, you can give me an overview of them to begin with. You can give me one at a time. You can do them in any order. Well, maybe 1 to 6, I guess.
So again, let's start just slightly upstream of that. So my basic theory is that there's no such thing as a perfect human being. Nothing too controversial there.
Yeah.
But there is such thing as something approaching a perfect team.
Hmm.
But if you go and talk to people in organizations, most of them will say it's an open secret in our organization that the top team operates somewhere between mild dysfunction and open warfare. It's a truism in organizational life.
That's why it's so fun to work in companies, right? I'm going to war every day with my team.
That the team that sits around the board table, they're always fighting. Yeah. And there are some good reasons for that. Probably not the time or space to go into this today, but there are reasons why every top team ends up with kind of greater or lesser degrees of conflict. And what that means is they're not talking about the things they need to talk about usually. Usually their agendas are incredibly packed. They have meetings with 15 things on and an hour to get through them, and they're rattling through them at great pace, trying to avoid treading on each other's toes and getting into punch-ups. And so the idea of the 6 game-changing conversations is a way really of codifying the work required to turn that kind of team who are in some level of conflict, not very productive, working really hard. These guys are working 60, 70, 80, 90, 100-hour weeks.
Really?
Usually for like tiny incremental bits of performance, 0.1%, 1%, 2%. And so really hard work, very ordinary or very limited gains.
Yeah.
And the 6 conversations are, the one that it's all founded on is conversations about ambition. And I deliberately use the word ambition. It's not vision. It's not goals. It's not anything, or mission, any of the other words. It's what is it we want to leave behind? What are we in this for? What do we really, truly, deeply want? And if we can share that, what's going on for each of the 6, 7, 8 people in the room, and find something together collectively that represents our collective ambition, that is incredibly powerful and also incredibly rare. So teams spend a lot of time crafting beautiful vision statements, which they stick on the wall, which mean nothing to the people who created them and even less to the people that they broadcast them to.
Yeah.
Whereas if you actually start to ask people, and perhaps I'll tell a story about that in a moment, what it is that really matters to them, suddenly you start to liberate something of the energy, the passion, the reasons people got into those jobs.
Yeah.
And then there are conversations about relationships. So the talk about how are you and I, how are we doing? What is it that needs to happen in order to build the trust required that we can talk about the really hard stuff. We can talk about the things which does cause conflict, which we are worried might be treading on other people's toes, knowing that they will receive that as a constructive, positively intended conversation.
How do you work through that kind of stuff? I mean, I'm thinking, I still struggle with that in my marriage, for God's sake, Conversation about, why are we talking about it that way, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you approach that kind of thing? How do you work with people on how they talk with each other in a way that they can move things forward?
You start obliquely, because you can't get straight from 0 to, let me tell you how I feel about you and let you tell me how you feel about me.
Right.
That's too big a step for most people. So the first session or 2 I do with teams, we do some other related stuff, maybe some personality profiling. The conversation about ambition is often actually quite trust building, because people start to realize that they have, despite their differences, they have a lot in common in terms of what they really want, which is news often.
Yeah.
But the single most powerful thing I do is a spectacularly simple and simultaneously terrifying thing. I call it speed feedback. And each person sits with each other person in the team for 15 minutes. And I would say to you, Robert, here are the 3 things you do which make my job easier. Here are the 3 things you do that make my job more difficult. Here are the 3 things I would like you to do more or differently. And then you do the same.
So simple, but so powerful, huh?
It is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And every team I've ever done it with, you can see the terror in their eyes. You want me to do what?
Tell the truth?
Terror because what if they jump down my throat?
Yeah.
And terror because what if I hear things that are really difficult? But what actually happens in that conversation is the first thing people do is they get a bunch of validation for things that they bring which they value. So the things that people receive as positive are usually the things that they really want to bring. It might be positivity or insight or whatever else it is. That's weird. And nobody at that level in organizations gets that kind of positive feedback. They just don't.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it?
And then the kind of things you do that make life difficult. Oh, right, okay, well, it's helpful to know that. I can't argue if it makes your job more difficult. I can argue about whether I could change it, but you're just giving me information. And then the requests tend actually, oh, really? Is that it? Oh, we can work. Well, I can't do that, but I could do this. Would that make this? So it becomes quite a pragmatic conversation about helping one another. And if you've got 9 other people, in the case of the team I'm currently working with, each of whom is trying to do something a bit different to make your job a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Suddenly life is more fun. Work is more fun. You feel more supported. You feel more productive. You feel like you've got more allies.
Yeah, my sense is that people are working in a corporation with a lot of people but are isolated. They're inside their head. They're blaming, they're judging, they're fighting. They don't know each other, and all of a sudden they know each other in a different way, right?
Absolutely. And people at that level of organization don't have people to talk to. There's a whole coaching industry built out of the fact that they have nowhere to go when they have very difficult jobs, complex, intractable, difficult problems to solve, incredibly dynamic environment, change all the time, demanding stakeholders, customers, everything else. These are really difficult jobs.
Yeah.
And they're alone with them.
Yeah.
And one of the things I say at the outset of the work I do with them is, at some level, all I want out of the work we do is that when we talk in a few months' time, you say, I know that everybody in this room has got my back, and this is my home team. This is the place I come for support and help, and when I've had a bad day, just to kind of vent. So it's a powerful thing.
Makes me kind of wonder, in ancient times, in native cultures, we had tribes, and it was life and death. You had to go out and chase the buffalo or do whatever, and you had to have each other's back. And they probably developed that kind of connection more intuitively over time. But how did you come up with that particular exercise?
I didn't invent it. It came from, I stole it from somewhere. Somebody else thought of it. I just use it. But the kind of magic is bringing it with enough confidence that people believe they'll be okay.
Right.
Nobody wants to do it. It feels really scary. But when I tell them it's going to be fine, there are many things I do. Some of them always work. Some of them sometimes work. This always works. I promise you at the end of this, you will thank me, even if I know you're probably feeling a bit nervous now. And somehow I can carry them, if I can just get them into it. By the end of the first conversation, they realize, do you know what? The other person is actually trying to be constructive. They're trying to be helpful. They're trying to support me. They're listening to the things I've got to say. This is going to be okay. I can do the other 8. Yeah.
And the fact that you're doing it with absolutely everybody. So how long does that exercise take with a group?
Half a day.
Half a day.
It depends on the size of the team, but for a team of 8, 9, 10 people, it would probably take half a day.
Yeah. Do they come back the next day with a shift, to some degree?
It definitely feels different. I mean, there's a relief, which is around. There's a bunch of practical things that tend to come out of that. They also get some feedback about some things that they might want to change. When 5 people tell you the same thing, it's probably a clue there. Rarely it's news to them, but sometimes the kind of impact of it isn't really known to them very, very clearly. But the other thing it does, which is more subtle, is it's just opened a channel of communication. Because we've talked once like this, it took us 15 minutes to have this conversation, for goodness sake. We know we can have that conversation next time. When you do something which is, which impacts my team or me or makes things difficult, I know I can have that conversation with you and you'll receive it because we've done that once before.
Yeah. So great. Very powerful. So what's number 3?
The third would be priority conversations. So every leadership team I have ever worked with has too many things on their list of priorities. And if you're trying to achieve everything, you're achieving nothing.
Right.
Is it when you sit at the top of an organization, there are literally hundreds of initiatives going on.
Right. Which
an
is
executive team can't take an active interest in more than a small handful.
Right.
A lot of executive teams try. I worked with a team many years ago, and they had a pile of I need to get my hands in the right place of documents. I had to look at monthly mine, which was literally 8 inches thick.
8 inches thick. This is 1.5 inches.
It's 1.5 inches of quality, Robert. That's what you have to remember.
Yes.
It's all worthy of reading. So the key with the priority conversation is what are the things that only this team can do together, which none of us can do independently, and which if we don't get done. And they rapidly come to, there are some themes which emerged no matter what team you work. So developing the next tier of managers is one of them. The culture of the organization is one of them. Really driving and communicating well and deeply in ways that people can understand the strategy is another one of them. There are a bunch of things which come up. And we talk about the magic number 7 plus or minus 2. You come across that idea?
No.
Anecdotally, it's a piece of social science research, I think done in the 1960s, which suggests that there's 7 things we can hold in our head at one time.
Right. And after that, it just, yeah.
So when you're making a mental list for yourself, if it's more than 7 things, you're not going to be able to hold it in your head. You might be able to write it down.
At this age, it's about 3 for me.
We're going to say that there must be some clever bit of maths which then it kind of relates that to age in my experience. But but for a leadership team, it ought to be about 7 because that's enough that they can that gives them enough breadth, but not so many that they are just kind of spread so thin that they can never really add any value to them.
So have you found for the average leadership team, how many of these issues, more than 7 are the average team grappling with?
I mean, I'm going to say anything between the better ones, 30 to 40.
Oh, wow. That's the better ones?
And the ones who are really diluted might be trying to keep an eye on 110, 120.
And that's physically impossible. It's not. It can't be done, and yet you're trying to do that. No wonder people are working 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day.
What you end up doing is building very, snazzy. With the advent of technology, you can build really smart dashboards with traffic lights and dials and all these kind of things, and that gives people the illusion that they're controlling or influencing them. But the truth is you can't then interact with any level of meaningful depth with those things. You can see whether everything's on track and then, wag your finger or send people to go and chase. But that's not adding value. That's not, if you've got these incredibly talented, experienced, insightful people, much better leave. There's a whole bunch of things which you want to leave to other people in the organization. And then there's a small subset of things that the leadership team has to do together because nobody else can do it.
So I would assume you take some time as a group to list all these things, cross them off the list, prioritize them. And how long does that take to sort of sift through all that stuff?
Have a guess.
Just half a day, huh?
30 minutes.
How many minutes?
30.
30 minutes they can do that. Wow, that's amazing.
Everybody sits down with a pad of Post-its, one idea per Post-it. They write the things that they think only this team can do. They make as many as they can make a list of. We stick them on the wall. We sort them into groups. 30 minutes probably on a good day, 45 on an ordinary day.
Yeah.
And then we stand back and we say, how does that compare with where you spend your time at the moment?
Right.
Not a comfortable conversation.
So maybe you get into this, but is this kind of an issue of we're not delegating, we're trying to do everything. We've got to figure out, because some of these things have to be done, but if we put our attention on that, we're screwed.
It's a sort of urgent, important kind of thing with a twist.
Yeah.
There is work. The biggest things that require doing in organizations are all cross-functional. They always require multiple functions. So if you let's think about culture, for example, which a lot of organizations are working on. No single function can own that. You can't improve the culture in half the company or one area or two areas. You have to do it across the piece. So people have to collaborate on that. But somehow it usually gets delegated to HR. Go fix our culture for us. They can't.
Yeah.
People see the culture in the behavior of the leadership. So it has to start with not even what you're doing, but how the leadership team goes about doing work. If people want to see how the culture works, they will look at the biggest initiatives the company is doing. They'll see how that gets done, and they'll conclude that's probably the culture around it.
Mm-hmm. So what do you do after that point? I see great movement already, clarity, relationship, priority.
Yeah. Then we talk about accountability. And I don't mean accountability conversations. Don't mean the individual accountability. Which essentially means what's going to happen to you if you don't do it.
Right.
Accountability conversations are about how do we make sure we leave the room with alignment about how do we decide things, and then how do we make sure that we leave the room aligned about the decision. Most teams don't make decisions well. I often don't even know whether we made a decision or we just talked about it.
Right.
Did you kill that? So they'll have a discussion, but there's 10 people in the room. How on earth do you make a decision to know that 10 people all genuinely agree? Usually you have a discussion till people, either you run out of time or people stop wanting to talk about it, which means maybe some people haven't even spoken at all. Certainly not everybody has explicitly said, yes, I agree. We will do that. I will stand up for this decision, even if I disagree with it, even if I've expressed an opposing view, but actually we've arrived at a collective conclusion that this is the way we should go.
So this impacts meetings, strategy.
Absolutely.
Anytime you're meeting, where are we going? Don't people leave meetings usually with a lot of frustration and indefinite direction and
For sure.
Lack of alignment? So that shifts all of that, right?
That's the idea.
Yeah.
So you and the decision-making mechanism is very simple. I help people with the simple tool, which is when you think you're starting to talk around in circles, because normally when you're talking about a big subject, you end up kind of actually with people repeating themselves.
Yeah.
I think we're at the point to make a decision. My proposal is this. And then you go around each person and say, Robert, do you agree with the proposal? And you have two choices. You can either say, yes, I support the proposal. No explanation, no qualification, no anything else. Yes, I support the proposal. Or, no, I have an alternative proposal. That's it. And then we go around, and when everybody says yes, we leave the room. And at that point, we know we've got everybody on board.
Right.
Because too often people leave the room, and the easiest way to not actually follow a decision is just not to speak about your opposition and to leave the room and then either not pursue the decision or in some cases to actively undermine it.
Yeah.
And you can't make progress that way.
So, the thing that hits me about all of these things, they're so simple, so common sense, and yet, as a group, people haven't figured this out, or they but I'm sure recognition dawns. Oh yes, why haven't we done this for years? That seems so simple. Hence the purpose of consultants.
If there's a challenge, it's that it can be, particularly for this group of people who are highly intelligent, highly driven, very successful, have been rewarded all their lives for being smart.
Right.
To have some things which seem so simple pointed out to you can be quite challenging. Can be quite, depending on your kind of your orientation to these things, can feel a bit embarrassing.
Right.
And people can occasionally be a little bit defensive or a little bit resistant. But by and large, because we're in the route, we've identified what the ambition is. All of this work is in the service of actually succeeding in the things that really matter to them.
Yeah.
If I'm giving you some simple tools that are easy to remember and easy to do, that are going to get us there faster, it's kind of simple.
Right. So we have 4 conversations so far. We got 2 more.
The 5th is delivery conversations. And I cheated here a bit because there's actually 3 kind of subsets of delivery conversations.
Okay.
So one is the capability of the next tier of management. Always an issue. We can sit with the 8, 9, 10 people in the leadership team for days and days and days and days, making flip charts and presentations and everything else. But at some point, you have to go out and talk to the rest of the organization and get the rest of the organization mobilized to do the things that you're talking about. And
right.
That means engaging the next tier of leaders and potentially the next couple of tiers of leaders who become critical to getting them on board, advocating for, supporting, and actually executing the work required to do the things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
The second one is culture. I've yet to come across an organization who are happy with the culture they have.
Really?
So in terms of how the work gets done, how people behave, how people interact together in order to get work delivered, that always needs some work, some effort and attention. And the third is stakeholders. There are always some stakeholders outside of the organization who have a bearing. At the very least, you have your shareholder, whoever that might be. It might be a parent company. It might be a private equity company. It might be some sort of remote executive board. It might be the kind of the board of the whole organization, and you're just one of the divisions. But typically they want lots of information. Sometimes they will meddle and get involved. And if you don't get that relationship right, you end up in this negative spiral where they constantly they're interfering, they want data, you spend all your time satisfying them and not enough time trying to drive forward. If you get them on side, you get this virtuous spiral where they've always got bigger fish to fry, other problems to deal with. So when you stop being a problem, they get out of your way. You guys clearly know what you're doing. You carry on. Just whatever you're doing, keep doing some more of that. We'll go and solve the other division's problems because they're really giving us a headache at the moment.
Right.
Then you get more flexibility, you get more approvals, you can spend money, you get less scrutiny, you're less involved in writing reports and justifying what you're doing or enacting things that other people are asking you to do. And if you get those 3 things right, leaders doing the right things, your culture right, and stakeholders out of the way, suddenly stuff starts to happen. So it's not about Gantt charts and project management and all that good stuff. That all has its place. But for the leadership team, those are the 3 levers for delivery.
Chris, did you deliver this in a retreat type setting with the top leadership team? Is that your typical way that you did it?
Yeah, broadly speaking, it's a 6 to 9 month engagement.
Okay.
Comprised of probably 4 to 6 day and a half team events. Deliberately a day and a half, so we'll do half a day the first day. We'll have dinner together, which is a big part of relationship building and building trust and having some of the informal conversations that are necessary, and then a full day the second day. And then in between those, I'll be having conversations with the sponsor, usually the chief exec, maybe the HR person in many cases. And I'll also be doing one-to-one coaching with every single member of the team to help them think about, because there's things that that you need to change as a member of this team. It's not appropriate to talk about those in a room with the other 9 people. So
right.
I'll be working with you on understanding what those things are, how you might respond to them, how your experiments have gone, and so on and so forth.
Right. So there's one more conversation.
Maybe the most important one.
Okay.
Learning conversations.
Okay.
And again, this kind of has a couple of dimensions. The first and simplest one is institutionalizing the idea that everything we do, we reflect on to see if we can do it better next time. Not a new idea. We ask ourselves 3 questions. Let's say at the end of each workshop I do with the team would be a place where we definitely do it. What's gone well in the last day and a half? What did you find tricky? What are we going to do more of or differently next time? We take 10 minutes at the end of it of every, which is not a lot when you think about it, of a day and a half offsite of 10 really valuable people's time, just to spend a little bit of time reflecting. And then I encourage them to use that simple review tool in exactly those 3 questions. You can use it to review individual performance. You can use it to review projects. If you look closely at the questions for the speed feedback, what do you do that helps me do my job? What do you do that makes my job more difficult? What would you want me to do differently? It's the same structure.
Right.
Again, super simple, super easy to remember. This isn't a hugely complicated model that you have to kind of look up every time. So that's one half of learning conversations, is just institutionalizing, trying to make things better every time.
Right.
And the other half is opening the room so that you can fully make use of all the insight and expertise and experience of a bunch of really, really smart people who've done a lot of things and know a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So building a dynamic where everybody contributes, where every perspective is regularly brought to these incredibly complex, nuanced, ambiguous challenges which these groups face, is always going to get you better outcomes and a better result.
This conversation is giving me some insights about my relationship with organizations. Because I'm a person who likes, I can do these things myself. What's my goal? What's my plan? What's my strategy? Et cetera. It's easier working by yourself in so many ways, obviously. But I can see someone that has that as a value going into a company that is chaotic and just melting down or wanting to run screaming from the room, because you just see that everybody is all over the place. No one's connecting. No one knows how to have conversations. There's a lot of conflict. It just gives me the willies just thinking about it. So I escaped that. I escaped the corporate culture. But you went through it. I mean, you worked in companies. You rose up the ladder. But you probably saw these kind of dysfunctions, every day.
Absolutely. So there were teams I worked in which were excruciating, where you're sitting in meetings, you're screaming inside, just waiting for the end. And there were teams I worked with which were incredible, where I felt like I gave absolutely my best, and where I felt like everybody did have my back, and where I really cared about the other people in the room and the mission that we were on. And those teams, I was probably 20, 30, 40% better. And I think the other people were 20, 30, 40% better. And that was one of the things that kind of led to the focus on leadership. It must be possible to make the latter. But there are forces which drive leadership teams apart. So a short story. The guy called, I've forgotten his name. He wrote a book called Seeing Systems, Barry Oshry, 1970s. And it was, if you think about reality TV without the TV. So he had a village, an actual village, and he would bring a group of people in, and at the beginning he would split them into three. And he said, you people are the tops, you own the resources. You people are the bottoms, you do the work. You people are the middles, you manage the bottoms on behalf of the tops. And then he gave them a series of tasks and left them to it. And he did this with groups from different nationalities, different genders, different races, different backgrounds, different ages, and the same things happen. And in the tops group, which is obviously the group that we're most interested in for this purpose, what happened was this. They started off feeling a little bit embarrassed, but also very privileged, because being put in charge and owning everything is clearly you won, right?
Yeah.
But they took that responsibility with some level of philanthropy and thought, okay, so we've won here, but we want to use that to kind of take care of the entire community. And they all muck in and roll up their sleeves, and they get on with doing whatever needs to be done. Things are going great. At some point, somebody says, this is crazy. We don't all need to be doing everything. We should split responsibilities. You be responsible for housing, you be responsible for food, you be responsible for schools, etc. And very soon things start to unravel.
Oh.
Because of course you've put people into a position where they're competing. Usually in this example, usually for people to get things done. So do we want the people or this group of people to go out there and collect crops, or do we want them to build houses, or do we want them to teach in the schools? So suddenly you sort of develop these kind of tensions between people. And that's exactly what happens in leadership teams. It makes perfect logical sense to divide responsibilities, but then you pit them against one another for people and money, essentially, the two critical resources in organizations.
Yeah.
So leadership teams will always drive themselves apart. I think of it like centrifugal force. And therefore, you need to keep applying a force in the opposite direction in order to keep the team integrated together, aligned. The minute you stop, they spin away from each other.
Yeah. Look at the insanity in the world right now. Look at the Middle East. Look at these competing tribes that it looks like it will go on for 1 million years, and it might. Either they'll kill each other or they'll finally figure something out. But yeah. So, it sounds like you've cracked the code, at least to some degree, to getting organizations working together relatively harmoniously to produce the results they want to produce. I can imagine it unleashes creativity in a whole new way, because you're not spending all the time knocking heads together, and you come up with an idea, and instead of people beating you up about it, you can look at it in a way that's much more, more harmonious. So what kind of results did you see? Have you got a few stories of breakthroughs and transformations?
Sure. So, I mean, the example, my favorite example was a steel company I worked with. And I don't know what it's like in the States, but in the UK, these steel plants grew up usually next to a river and a small town grew up around the plant. They employed a lot of people, so a town grew up in order to kind of provide the labor for the plant.
Right.
And but the steel industry, certainly in this country, and I suspect it's true of the US as well, is an absolute basket case. It loses money, hand over fist, year in, year out.
Really?
Yeah.
And yet we still need steel.
Everybody needs steel, but you can, because of the labor costs in the Far East, you can make it far, far cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
And also a lot of our steel making plant is legacy, whereas some of the plant on the other side of the world is much more leading edge. So what's happened in these steel companies is over the years, in a good year, they'll lose just a little bit of money. In a bad year, they'll lose a lot of money.
How is that sustainable? If you keep losing money, you don't have a company.
There's two things keep it going. One is that that governments like to have their own steel industry. It's a sort of a critical strategic industry.
Right.
So they're constantly tinkering to kind of bail people out. And so the owners of these companies are sort of holding on to the idea that, eventually somebody will always kind of help out in some way, tax breaks or energy breaks or whatever.
Right.
But the other is that once you've closed them, it's incredibly expensive to reopen them. So there's a sort of irrational hope strategy that goes on, which, well, why do we close it now? We're so close. Just 2 years ago, we nearly made a profit. If we just hang on, maybe, that kind of strategy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this was the story for this plant. It had been going since the 1970s, losing a lot of money or a little money for many, many years. And they had another change of ownership. They had 3 or 4 changes of ownership in the time I knew them. And this time they had a European chief executive, and all the plants trooped in each year to present their business plans in July. And this plant trooped in and they presented them a business plan, which was, we are going to lose £12 million next year. And they were feeling quite pleased about this. They thought this was quite a good result compared to what had been the previous year.
Pounds. The government can supply the rest.
But, of course, with a graph that said, and of course the year after will be better and the year after will be better, and then in 5 years' time we'll be making so much money. The classic
delusion.
Except that the new chief executive wanted to find an example. He wanted to kind of send a message to everybody. And he decided, unfortunately for my client, that they were the ones he was going to make an example of. He said, no, that's not going to happen. You've got until Christmas to get to break even. See ya. What? Wait, but not interested. Next.
Break even by Christmas?
Break even by Christmas.
Okay.
And guess what happened? Liberated extraordinary creativity, what had been a previously really, really difficult relationship with the unions and so forth. Everybody got in the same boat. There were people painting the offices off the shop floor, and they made a bunch of decisions which they probably should have made years before, but they've been avoiding for various reasons. Huge amount of creativity and effort was released, and by Christmas they'd broken even. Amazing.
Really?
They became a cause célèbre around the group. They had groups of executives from other plants being sent to ask them how they did all this and so on. In the middle of February, my phone rang. Chief executive said to me, this is great, but we're still making no money. We feel really good about it. My people were exhausted. I haven't done anything before now because basically we just needed to take a breath.
Yeah.
But what we're finding is it's much, much harder to get from 0 to some million than it was to get from -12 to 0.
Right.
Can you help? Sure. So I went in, and in the first meeting I said, so what's your goal here? What are you trying to achieve? An ambition conversation, the beginnings of. And they said, well, we want to we've got our business plan says we're going to make £30 million profit in 3 years' time. Okay, great. Where did that number come from?
Pulled it out of their ass, right?
Everybody starts looking at their fingernails. And then eventually the finance director says, I made it up. It was, I knew it needed to be a certain big enough to be for return on capital employed and all that kind of stuff. I needed it to be smaller than something in order to be vaguely credible. So I sort of, and then we backworked it all from there. Okay, fine. Forget that. What do we really, really want to do here? Bear in mind, these were hard-nosed, I think all men, if memory serves, actually very brainy engineers tend to run steel plants, not kind of dirty under the nail, coal-face cut types.
Yeah.
But very left brain, very thinky, very rational.
Yep.
And what they said was amazing. What they said was, what came out of this conversation was, we used to mean something in this town. We used to be the place where every man worked, where every son would come at the end of school, when he finished school for his apprenticeship to work, where every housewife got the money to buy food, where every shopkeeper was dependent. The town was us and we were the town. We meant something. It mattered. And now we're a joke. years and years and years, we salami sliced. There are so few people work here anymore. What we really want is to mean something in this town again. Wow, I did not expect that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
So what's that going to take? Well, if we're going to grow again, we need a massive program of investment in plant. Because we've been cutting costs forever, our plant is absolutely in pieces. They had clients who were 3 years overdue for their steel.
Oh, wow.
3 years overdue because the plant was constantly breaking. Okay, how much is it going to cost you for the reinvestment program you need? I can't remember what the number was. I think it was 30-40 million pounds or something like that. It was a lot of money. Yeah. But there's no point even thinking about that. No, we've been losing money all these years.
Yeah, for a company that's losing money.
No, the parent is never going to invest that kind of cash. Okay, right. What's it going to take for the parent to invest the cash? We do some maths. We conclude that we need to be at a profitability of 70 million in 3 years.
Wow, 70.
So then we start thinking, okay, what has to be true to do that? We go through every single initiative, every single thing that was going on. We do the exercise about, what are our priorities? What's this leadership team for? All that kind of stuff. Root and branch across the plant, we reviewed it against the plan. It might have been 70 million in 5 years, actually, but it was a lot more. And within 12 months, we were at a run rate of 30 million. So the number that they targeted for 3 years' time, we hit on a run rate basis, not on an annualized basis, in a year. Fairly shortly after that, we went in front of them with a big investment proposal. They approved it. 3.5 years or so later, that investment was made. I don't know where they got to on profit, but they got pretty close to that trajectory. So that's the power particularly of ambition conversations, but then everything else falling on the back of that. How do we make decisions together? How do we become accountable for making the really hard calls? How do we really identify the priorities, the things that genuinely going to make the difference between whether we're on track for this or not? How do we get that executed at speed, given how hollowed out our organization is?
You look at the economy, you look at industry in the United States, I suppose everywhere, how industries have been hollowed out, and we have cities in the United States that are just complete disasters. I was reading, I can't remember the name of the city, but the industry disappeared, and you think, well, why is all of that? And it sounds like these people don't know how to work together to make these results consistently, so things just fall apart.
And I think we have to not oversimplify. That the world is a moving place, and industries can and do fail. But it is my experience from working with leadership teams that there is enormous amounts of untapped potential to do better. But no, it doesn't matter how hard all the individuals work within it, until you start to get the collective working well, then things don't tend to move. And I don't think we're very good at collective work, particularly at the top end of organizations. So people who tend to float to the top of organizations tend to be people who've been very good at getting things done in their own patch. And then suddenly they find themselves in a role where to get things done, they have to work really well across the patch.
Right.
And it's a different set of skills, a different set of challenges.
Have you ever thought of training people to do what you do?
Not really. Not really. I think a couple of reasons. I have a few friends who work in this kind of field, and you might differ because you've been really successful at kind of codifying what you do. But my perspective is it's really difficult to separate me and the way I bring this stuff from the tools. And I'm on a different project now as well. So I'm, as a person of restless soul, I'm now kind of training to be a psychotherapist. So Having seen all the strange behaviour that goes on, I've got
Yeah.
an unsatiable appetite to try and understand why people behave the way they do.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. A little less stressful, perhaps, than and the challenge is very different than trying to turn around a whole organization with this stuff. But that's very
Maybe
interesting.
in
Have you
different ways, I guess.
Have you started your psychotherapy practice yet?
Yeah. I'm sort of 3/4 of the way through a 4-year master's degree, and that means I've been seeing clients for a couple of years now.
Right. So what's your goal there? What's your ordinary vision about that?
Well, I mean, the kind of story goes that by about 2019, the success of the book, the business was crazy. For some strange reason, it's something to do with the way my brain is wired up. At the same time, I decided I wanted to be a competitive racing cyclist, so I was doing that as well alongside.
Right.
And I basically wore myself out until about 2019 and decided then that I wanted to semi-retire. Then there was this kind of little flu bug thing went around, and I was forced to do nothing at all for a few months.
Yes.
And I did not care for that at all. So I thought, what can I use my skills for? What can I do with these skills I have, which might benefit people who are slightly less fortunate, the extremely fortunate people I do most of my work with.
Yeah.
And so I speak to a few charities and about counselling and therapy and that kind of stuff. And they say, yeah, well, I'm sure you've got transferable skills, but I'm not letting you near any of our people without proper training, which is reasonable. So I could have done a couple of years of counselling training, but that's not how my brain works. So I did the 4-year master's degree. And I'll probably end up doing, at the moment, the plan is a day a week of work with individual clients. And I work with a charity working with clients with drug, alcohol, quite severe mental health problems. And probably a day a week doing couples work and family work, because the group dynamic stuff, I can't leave that behind.
Yeah.
And now, of course, I find myself in rooms with these executives with a whole new set of insights into why they behave the way they do. And trying to work out whether and how I should bring that into the room.
Do you ever have the thought, Chris, that, gee, I wish I had 3 or 4 lifetimes to do everything to make the difference I know I could make?
I said to somebody the other day, well, what was it? I said, oh, I really wish I'd done something or other. And they said, oh, well, what's stopping you? And I was like, come on. Even my appetite for taking on new things has limits. I think at the age of 58, it's probably my last master's degree, but who knows?
Yeah, well, often as ordinary visionaries, as entrepreneurs, as self-employed people, we feel that we can do anything, and we have a lot of ambition, and we have a lot of creativity, and yet, there are limitations to the physical body and mind, obviously, and but to wrap up your business this way, I think is very admirable, because some people work themselves to death. And it's kind of like it's never enough. I got to this place where I think I've done everything I wanted to do. I've impacted thousands of people. I've worked with, hundreds and hundreds of people over the years. And maybe it's time to move on and have fun in a different way. Listen to more jazz.
And I still do the work. I'm still working with business clients and leadership teams, but without the same need or drive. I don't actively promote it anymore. People I've worked with before in some capacity come and approach me, and if I want to work with them, I will work with them. And because I love it. I love that work. I love learning the business. I love learning the people. I love the results we get.
Yeah.
But I'm not chasing it anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
I expect I'll be, as long as my body doesn't give up, which, hopefully should be a good few years yet, I will still do that as well as the psychotherapy.
Yeah. I'd love to see your work continue through other people somehow. I mean, you've got what you laid out for me is so common sense, so simple, but so powerful. It's about communicating. It's about aligning. It's about knowing where you want to go. It's about how to resolve things. And those are the sort of the soft skills that are really the hardest, right?
And the book, the back third of the book is entirely comprised of the tools. So all the things I've described to you are described in detailed how-to form in the orange pages in the back third of that book. And that was part of my thought was,
Yeah.
I want to give this stuff away. I can't work with every leadership firm in the world or anything, even a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of them. So I would love that other people do it. I'm not sure I have the energy to go out and recruit people into a course to teach them to do it.
I know. Let's start a business doing that. Not. So, something I wanted to talk to you about a bit is about your relationship with the Maasai tribe in Africa and how you connected with them, what you did with them, how they've influenced your business and your life. You have a picture, it's called Jump, and you have a picture of 6 or 7 people in a Maasai tribe with someone jumping very high in the air. So what's that all about? And tell us about the Maasai.
Oh man alive! This might be a separate interview. Maybe
we will at some point.
The short version is that some years ago, I and a couple of American colleagues came up with the idea that instead of taking people, this form of developing leaders where you kind of, build a raft or, hike across the mountains in your underpants or whatever else it might be. We had the thought that instead of doing something made up, why wouldn't you take a group of leaders to the developing world and have them do something meaningful, taking some money with them, perhaps enough money to dig a well and that they contribute in some way to the physical digging of the well. And we tried to build a business doing that. And all the organizations we went to said, this is a fantastic idea. I love it. Let me know how it goes. And I'm still in touch with a lot of people we met. There's no way I can get this past the people I would need to get to approve the spend for it. So we couldn't get it off the ground. Nonetheless, in that time, I fell in love with the people in the community. Since that time, I've been 10 or 12 times more. And I concluded, well, if we can't do the work by effectively transferring the wealth from these big organizations for whom it's $10,000 to dig a well. The organizations I work with it's less than a rounding error. So moving some of the money over there. If I can't move the money over there by persuading them to send people on leadership development programs, I'm going to send money over there by running a business, making money, and then I will send it. So for some years, I sent the profits from my business to the Maasai community. We built school buildings, we built health buildings, we built other accommodation, and I've since taken friends and family and business people out there to visit. It's an extraordinary place. They're extraordinary people. And the link with the book is they live in an incredibly demanding, scary, difficult environment. And the only way you can survive in that environment is by working together. Right. And in their world, it's community first, self second. And so they've been living, and long before Western business thinkers started to talk about the power of collaboration and working in teams and all that kind of stuff, these guys have been doing it for millennia. And to hear them talk about it, some of the tools and the stories and the are incredibly powerful, and they live it. So the book is illustrated. Each of the 6 conversations is illustrated by a story from the Maasai, which brings that idea to life in a very different part of the world, where cooperation is essential, not a nice to have.
Very good. Yeah, you can imagine taking a management team, throwing them out into the wilderness and saying good luck. They'd all be dead in a month, right? But yeah.
One time we were out there, we woke up in the morning, there was an enormous commotion. Well, what the hell's going on? Oh, it's early. We go to the door, there's lots of people rushing around. The elephants have trashed the waterhole again. That does not happen where I live. I don't know about you.
Yeah, really. That's fascinating. By the way, there is someone who has cracked the code on building wells in Africa. Have you heard of Charity Water?
No.
Look him up. Very
Okay.
remarkable guy who had this kind of awakening and realizing he was a nightclub owner and stuff and kind of led a seedy life. And he met this guy that turned his life around. Now they're built hundreds of wells across Africa and the East. And I contribute to them every month. It's just look at the website. It's really inspiring. Someone you might want to connect with. Charity Water.
Charity Water. I'll take a look.
Yeah, it's really, really something. Well, Chris, it's been delightful talking to you. And
it's been good talking to you again.
The thing that I really loved is that I love systems. I love things that work. Love things that are broken down into pieces and that it's all moving in a direction. And you've kind of cracked the code on how to get people to work together productively and effectively and successfully. I mean, that's not a small accomplishment. So if there's any management people out there, get the book. And I just want to express my appreciation for what you're doing.
Well, I mean, thank you, Robert. As I said, an awful lot of this wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the work we did in 2014, something like that.
So thank you very much, Chris.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.